I think climate change is a big problem. It's a tiny problem compared with nuclear weapons. In fact, I think I've said this to you before. You know, we can more or less render all the places that, at least that wealthy people like us live, largely uninhabitable in the space of a couple of hours. And once it starts, it's incredibly difficult to, we've actually built these hair trigger mechanisms. We've got a few checks and a lot of reservations about starting the escalation, but we've got no answers to, well, what happens if some people in America or Russia think that there are some missiles coming their way?
Nicholas, thanks for that video. Tell me more about these ancient republics or ancient democracies and the link. I didn't really draw the link. I thought they were just like playing at democracy a long time ago, but there seems to be like an actual route through from what they were doing to what we're doing now.
Yeah. So both the democracy of Athens and the Republic of Rome, which should not be mistaken for a democracy, it wasn't, but it was a republic, and both of them were a way of thinking about the structure of government was that they were anti-monarchies or anti-tyrannies. So Rome famously had 7 kings. The last one was pretty bad news. Tarquinius Superbus, I think, is a nice name, I guess, but if I recall him correctly from my ancient history at school. And likewise, Athens arose out of tyranny and oligarchy. And as a result, they set their systems up very deliberately to ensure that there was no most powerful office that a tyrant could aspire to and then subvert the rest of the system. So Rome had a series of institutions that had the Senate, and it had institutions that were supposed to represent the plebs, the lower classes, and it had the highest office was consul, and there were 2 consuls, and they had effectively had a power of veto over each other. And in fact, we get our word dictator from the arrangement in Roman law where a single person could become the dictator for 6 months in an emergency. And of course, you can imagine what some people did. They became a dictator for rather longer than 6 months. In Athens, many people will have heard of Pericles. He was very dominant in the Athenian democracy for several decades, was the main person responsible for getting the money together to build the Parthenon. And he never held the highest office. He was a general, a strategos, and there were 10. In any year, there were annual elections, and in any year, there were 10 generals. So Pericles got the power that he got by being a great speaker and being very well regarded and being regarded as a great leader in the assembly. And that makes a big contrast with modern democracies. Modern democracies are democratized monarchies. This started, I guess, in the Glorious Revolution in the 17th century in England. You have a king with aspirations to absolute kingship, and the parliament starts saying, well, we're going to impose advisors on you, and so on. And then you have the American Revolution and the French Revolution. In each case, you end up with effectively a monarch. So we call the head of the government and the head of state in the United States a president. They are an elected monarch, a temporary elected monarch. If you don't like that term, that's fine. My point is there is a single point of power. If you're an ambitious person, you head for that most important office and see if you can poison well and get the whole of the rest of the system to back you up.
Of course, like the Romans and the Greeks, they weren't doing this democracy or republic just for the good of the poor. It was I presume it was the most efficient way of getting rid of somebody who'd gone nuts as well too. Like if you had a tyrant, the Tarquinius you mentioned,
Yeah.
everybody hated him, but they didn't really have a way of getting rid of him without an uprising, and that's inefficient and destructive.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And then after the uprising, you get the idea never again. And it's, our cultures, our countries really went through that after World War II. Never again. And we got richer, stronger democracies for a long time. And now that's kind of drifted into some other part of our consciousness where we just take a whole lot of things for granted. And, we're getting into a whole lot of trouble. But yes, the ancient democracies, the ancient republics were built after tyranny, after monarchies had degraded into tyranny, and communities said, never again, let us spread power in whatever way we can. And that's what they did in Athens and Rome.
Just as an aside, on the subject of never again, do you hold much store in the idea that never again literally fades because people die naturally, and that you're going to have an 80-year cycle of forgetting the never again?
Yeah, I mean, I find I'll tell you something. I try to push against this. I think reasonably successfully. I've one of the things that's happened in since the fall of the Berlin Wall, so 1989, a long time ago now, is that we sort of thought, oh, good, we don't have to worry about nuclear weapons anymore. I never thought that. And I still think that nuclear weapons I think climate change is a big problem. It's a tiny problem compared with nuclear weapons. In fact, I think I've said this to you before. We can more or less render all the places that, at least that wealthy people like us live, largely uninhabitable in the space of a couple of hours. And once it starts, it's incredibly difficult we've actually built these hair trigger mechanisms. We've got a few checks and a lot of reservations about starting the escalation, but we've got no answers to, well, what happens if some people in America or Russia think that there are some missiles coming their way? Kaboom. And we've kind of forgotten all that stuff. We're starting to learn it again, but we haven't got it into our bones because we haven't really suffered it. And people really did suffer through World War II.
So the presence of those stockpiles is at least like the overgrown pillars of a previous civilization, something to remind us that it's impossible to forget never again or World War.
Yeah.
Okay, before we come to the end of the world, we'd like to get to the end of this playlist. Tell me about Michigan, because we'll come to the red-tied elephant in the room in a while. But I was surprised in the video that one glimmer of hope you mentioned was right in the heart of, post-industrial America, and in Michigan.
Yeah, and I suppose it's not that surprising, given that I think at least you and I agree that the United States is at the cutting edge of the degradation of modern democracy. It's not very surprising that it's also at the cutting edge, as America so often is, of innovating its way out of a problem. It's only a very small bit of innovation at the moment. So here's my proposition that I call this the Magna Carta moment. And what I mean by that is that in 1215, as it's a date I remember well, having mentioned it lots of times in a previous video. In 1215, the barons of England imposed upon King John the idea of juries in our legal branch. You can't be incarcerated, you can't have your property taken off you without the judgment of your peers going along with the judgment of elites. What we did with democracy was we took the king We took the monarch and we democratized the monarch, but we didn't democratize the monarch by direct reference to our peers, by direct reference to ordinary people. We have judges, we have parliamentarians, we have highly successful elites who are running the process of keeping power distributed. And that raises the problem that elites are turning themselves into unaccountability sinks there. Nobody went to jail for the global financial crisis, and there's always somebody else to point to on a political matter or something like that. And there's a great deal of self-dealing. So politicians effectively in the United States supervise the process of electoral boundaries and so on. Now, it turns out that Republicans and Democrats in the United States almost equally are strongly against gerrymandering. Everybody understands how unfair it is and whether it's in their favor or not. Politicians will vote for what works for them, but the corresponding voters actually, if they're in the right sort of institution, will defend democratic norms. The Michigan...
And is that, to interrupt, sorry, Nicholas, is the thing about gerrymandering, is that an unusual topic in that it very closely resembles your tennis match analogy, because two players playing in a chaotic environment know that while they might win because of a dodgy call this time, it's so chaotic they could lose the next time. So it's not because they like each other that they dislike gerrymandering. It's just that they know it could, unless one gains the complete upper hand and gerrymanders everything, they're equally as vulnerable to it. So it's self-preservation.
Yeah, there I think you can make a distinction between politicians and voters. I think politicians are so inured to defending their own political interest that however unfair it is, they will promote a gerrymander if they think it is a long-term benefit to themselves. Republican voters, even though the gerrymandering, most of the gerrymandering that remains in the United States favors Republicans, not all of it, but Republican voters are not proud of that. And Republican voters actually, not just because they think, oh, well, it might harm me at some stage, they just don't think it's fair. So that's the evidence that they think it's really, really bad. Most people, I think if you go into a school or just talk to people at work or whatever, most people have a kind of a sense of themselves as reasonable people. So I think it's often politicians will go into politics with a kind of idealism, and within 2 or 3 terms, they've understood that their role is as functionaries in a disciplined army which doesn't care too much about being fair to the other side. They spend most of their time trying to beat the other side. So I think there's a big difference there. And in fact, in Australia, we had an unusual situation where people managed to get into our Senate with extremely low votes via a mechanism I won't explain. It was about the accumulation of preferences. So someone with 1% of the vote ended up as one of the 10 or 12 senators from a particular state. Now, one of them represented the Motorists Enthusiasts Party, for instance. Now, one of the interesting things about those guys is that they had a few policies that they'd gone into Parliament with, but then they listened to the debates and they ended up supporting the side that they thought won the debate. Well, no other parliamentarians did that. And another thing was that the Prime Minister of the time from a major party ganged up on these guys and said, we're going to come up with a new system that's going to stop that. And the journalists said, oh, well, he's going to make it in their interest to support this legislation. And they didn't vote with their own naked political self-interest. They voted for what they thought was the right thing. And normal party politicians can't do that. They're all not, the ones I know are nice people, but that's not the job. The job is not to make their mind up and vote for the right thing. Their job is to be part of a party that you might argue does that, but
And their loyalty is to the party, which is something I always thought with the fundamental political weakness of a movement, like for example, environmental movement, the Green Party, is that they would, and you could say the same about a religious-based party, is that their loyalty is to a cause higher than the political party, which is an innate potential fragility within that party. Absolutely. That they will examine their conscience and jump ship because it's the right thing to do according to, their beliefs. Whereas the apparatchiks are managers in a company, and their loyalty is to the preservation of the company.
That's right. And these days, it wasn't the case when I was a kid, but these days, the job of a party politician, certainly in my country, is to be an apparatchik, is to vote with the party. Even it's worse than that, because you basically don't pipe up in the party room very much, because you just get yourself known to be a troublemaker. So there's a huge...
It's not conducive to promotion. I suppose we better get back to Michigan. Sorry, I dragged you away from Michigan, but just the nuts and bolts of why is Michigan special?
Yeah. So what Michigan has done is it's set up the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. It has 13 people on it, nearly 12, like a normal jury. They're chosen by lottery. They're chosen in a way that makes sure that there is at least 4 Democrats and at least 4 Republican voters, people who identify as Republican voters, not politicians, and 4 people who identify as Democrat voters, and the rest are unaligned. And that is the body that has drawn boundaries since 2018, I think. And there was a gerrymander in place for many, many years, and it has ended gerrymandering. And I see this as having crossed that Magna Carta threshold. They didn't say we'll give it to some judges. That's how we've solved gerrymandering for now in Australia. They said we will get ordinary people who, in a randomly selected group, are about as hard to corrupt as you can find. They're human beings, so I guess they're not incorruptible, but they're less corruptible than anyone who is tied into the career system, which includes judges and politicians and all these people who keep their mouth shut and, keep themselves nice and get themselves promoted.
So you made the video a year ago, so we are now... The video was a year ago, but we are 5 years closer in that year to a Magna Carta moment, and barons of all ilks are worried about tyranny. Is it the case that in a time of genuine fear about democracy, in whatever form it is, that is where any complacency about democracy is burnt away, and people have to go, what is crucial to the survival of democracy? We need to start thinking, because Donald Trump is gradually, eroding it or shaping it to his wishes. So are we so much closer to the Magna Carta moment now, in the United States and around the world?
Well, I think we are. That's because I am horrified by what I see from Donald Trump, but I don't think we are politically as yet, because I think you kind of have to be led into disaster. And if you think of the chaos in the United States when COVID arrived and Donald Trump was president, some of us, I don't think I was sure of this, but, many of us thought, well, surely people can see that this is a bloody disaster. This is just terrible. So our capacity to forget is strong if we actually do not suffer real disaster. So I don't know. I think this can go on. I certainly think it is the case that we have seen a degree of degradation about speaking the truth, and I certainly don't believe that Democrats tell the truth or anything like that. But there is a degree to which we have descended into a kind of, well, I used, before we started this discussion, the word kayfabe, a word used to describe what the discourse of WrestleMania, the discourse of professional wrestling, which when you're about 9 or 10 or 11, you start saying to your siblings, you know, these people, I think it might all be put on, you know, it might all be pretend. And that's a big breakthrough for you. But in fact, adults who I'm guessing actually do know it's put on go along and they enjoy being part of this fictitious world. And that is the style of communication of Donald Trump. More and more of his cabinet and minions do the same thing. Donald Trump, for instance, well, apparently it came from Elon Musk, who tweeted that that Volodymyr Zelensky had 4% popularity in Ukraine, just completely made up. Donald Trump said it. No one apologizes. No one says, oh, I'm sorry, that was wrong. There isn't any. So everything is crowded out by affect, by the performance, and there is no longer. We're not even in that tennis game where it's very rowdy, but they kind of sort out most or eventually all of the point. We've moved past that.
Yeah. So just like wrestling, the chaos is the point, and then, but unlike wrestling where it ends and then people go home,
and
this goes on.
Yeah.
And in wrestling as well, too, the actual cost to the collateral damage to wrestlers is hidden, because a lot of those wrestlers in the famous eras of the 90s went nuts, and you know, some of them killed themselves and killed their family. Like, it's we don't see that, but again, that's abstracted away from us. Just for anybody wondering, kayfabe could be come from carnival speak for be fake, so kind of a reverse, or for the Latin cavere, to keep cave, which is slang to keep care or beware. So it could be a 100-year-old term, in case anybody's wondering. And literally, he has hired Linda McMahon, wife of wrestling boss Vince McMahon, to be the head of education.
That's right,
Secretary of Education, which is very kayfabe, really.
To WrestleMania as well. I mean, there's nothing sinister about that. He could be doing that and then become a normal politician, but he's not a normal politician.
So, in the context of all of that, is it about, and like, while we can't wait to be led into disaster, and I know there'll be other videos about solutions, but in the meantime, is it about small, like, is the truth like rodents during the eradication of the dinosaurs? Like, does truth have to hide in caves and learn the skills until the dust is cleared?
I think that the truth of the people, the idea that the people in the right institution can preserve the truth, is something which can exist at a very small level, like the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. And I think I'm just incredibly glad that it's there, because it is the first example that I know of the Magna Carta moment being embraced by a Western polity, and ordinary people being given a role in defending the democratic norms of their system. So yeah, that's like a few rodents surviving the age of the dinosaurs. I'll take that as a metaphor. Thank you.
Yeah, and that kind of hope is important, even if we're all atomized bits of still giving a shit around the world, knowing what else is going on, is part of it.
The chaos that what I'm trying to suggest, which is really very modest and moderate, is easy to be lost in all the, why can't I say something more exciting, more instant? Well, I can't. But look at all those little rodents on the floor of the forest. They might be strong, where we're all just little rodents. And to hell with these dinosaurs. They're too big. They're too fragile in their enormity to survive or to thrive, I think.
Yeah. with their little useless hands. Okay, that's a little bit of inspiration
That's right.
for us as we move into the next video. And we have to be more entertaining in that because it's
It
about
is.
entertainment.